Victor Hugo's novel Les Miserables tells the story of Jean Valjean, a man recently released from jail in 19th century France. As a parolee, he's unable to get work or accommodation, so he ends up begging and sleeping on the streets. But he's taken in one day by a kindly old bishop who gives him a hot meal and a bed for the night. But Valjean, hardened by 19 years in prison, takes advantage of this bishop's kindness. He steals the bishop's precious silverware and makes off in the middle of the night. Well, he's soon caught and dragged back by the police back to the bishop to confront him and confess to his crime. But the bishop does something extraordinary. The bishop says to the police, "Oh, you are mistaken. Thank you for bringing my friend back here. This man is my friend, and I gave him the silverware as a gift." And the policeman and Valjean himself look quite bewildered. And the bishop says, "But wait, my friend, you left so early, you left this candlestick behind," and takes a precious silver candlestick and hands it to him also and says, "Take this also." But as he steps in towards Valjean, he leans in and whispers in his ear and says, "Take this precious silver and make yourself an honest man. And remember that I have brought your soul for God." It's a haunting, powerful scene. And if you've read the book or seen perhaps the musical or one of the films, you'll know that Valjean does indeed take up the bishop's challenge. He does become an honest and good man. He becomes the hero of the story. And we see in how many ways Valjean then pays forward that generosity that the bishop shows him. Jesus also tells a story of generosity, of undeserved generosity, in the parable we hear today, that parable of the workers in the vineyard who work different lengths of time but are all paid the same amount. For some of those workers, the ones who came first early in the day, they get a fair wage. They get exactly what they deserve and what they expect. But the workers who come at the very end in receiving the same amount get far more than they deserve. The owner, the vineyard owner, is generous towards them. And that generosity provokes the anger and the jealousy of the other workers, leading the vineyard owner to say to the first workers, "Don't be envious because I am generous." This is one of Jesus' provocative parables, as so many of them are, that are meant to stir us up and make us perhaps feel like we might feel for those first workers and think, well, they didn't get a fair deal given what the others received. But this idea of this parable is not really about wages. It's not about industrial relations and award rates, even though it does have implications for that. This parable is, like all Jesus' parables, about the nature of God and about what it's like to live in God's kingdom. And so the vineyard owner is an image of God. Jesus' point is that God is generous. And this was against the background of the time where the Pharisees in particular were very stringent. They wanted to count how many sacrifices people had made at the temple. They wanted to count how many laws people had broken and try and weigh up people in the scales to see whether they deserved God's favor or not. But Jesus wipes that away and says, no, God is merciful. God is generous. We often think of mercy as being about, the term mercy as being about forgiveness of sins. And yes, it includes that. But it's much, much more. Mercy is about God giving to us more than we deserve, more than we have earned. Cardinal Walter Casper says that mercy is indeed the nature of God, because if God has made all that is from nothing, then nothing in creation and nor ourselves have any claim on God's generosity. So everything God gives is merciful. All that God gives, our very life. God sustaining of us, let alone a relationship with him and the possibility of eternal life through Jesus. This is God's great mercy. And that's a term that Pope Francis loves to use about God and also invites us to use for ourselves too, that we must become merciful as God is merciful. The parable we hear today also has a sting in the tail, as so many of the parables do. The reaction of envy and anger by some of those workers. And in the weeks to come, we'll explore that a little bit more, because for a few weeks we're going to hear from parables in the last few chapters of Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus really presents these parables that challenge the ideas of who's in and who's out. They're parables of judgment that really challenge our assumptions about fairness. And so they ask us to look again to God as being merciful, giving to us more than we deserve, better than we deserve. So let's take up that challenge today. We'll look in the future in weeks ahead about what that implications might be. But let's firstly accept gratefully the mercy God shows us. In the story of Les Mis, Valjean goes on to be grateful to the bishop, but then by paying forward that generosity is shown to him. Let us count how many ways that God has been generous to us, merciful to us, that we too might be generous and merciful to others this week.